Welcome to the Debrief. We're back. Thanks for sticking with us. I'm Donna King. This is Carolina Journal's weekly recap of everything happening in public policy and politics, coming to you every week. Thanks for sticking around with us. Joining us this week, of course, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation. Always just a wealth of information. Thanks for sticking around with us. And David Bass, who covers everything for education for Carolina Journal. You can read everything that he writes on carolinajournal.com. And David Larson, our opinion editor at Carolina Journal, full of wit and wisdom. We're going to be covering a lot of it today. The big news in Raleigh, President Joe Biden is here in Raleigh, in North Carolina. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of him. What do you think? He'll be talking all about the economy and everything, but shutting down Raleigh, North Raleigh, to do it.
Yeah, he's not probably winning a lot of friends in Raleigh, at least in the area near where he's going to be traveling, because all of the area is shut down. That always happens with presidential motorcades. It's not just President Biden, but still it causes a hassle for anyone who's there, anyone who has kids in a school that is on that route, or there's a hospital that's near that route that could cause some problems, and just any other people who need to conduct their business. That's going to be an issue. And then I think the other thing will be just how well is his message received. He's going to be talking about how great the economy is, and I think a lot of people are thinking, maybe for you, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, this is a big deal. And it's a big deal for schools, parents. I think he's going to be really talking a lot about infrastructure. This is a big thing. North Carolina is about $5.5 or so billion out of federal taxpayer money for infrastructure. Yeah. You know, what do you think? How do you think this message is going to land?
Yeah, I mean, it shows how important North Carolina still is on the national stage. I mean, Kamala Harris, Vice President, was here recently as well, kind of in the Triangle area. So, Biden being here already, we're, just a few weeks into 2024, it's already go time with this. But interestingly, I mean, the economy this year, it's going to be interesting to see how it pans out, because a lot of people obviously are not satisfied with where things are right now. A lot of people are hurting. Inflation ticked up just a little bit again in December. We're seeing it again. So, by the time the election actually rolls around, how much is that going to be weighing on voters' minds? Obviously, quite a bit. So
sure, y'all were talking before we got started about the last time a motorcade seemed to come right straight by the office of the John Locke Foundation.
Yeah, that was very interesting. That was back when the Locke Foundation was still downtown, and so one of the main routes took it right by the office building, and because we couldn't really do anything else, everyone stood outside, watched it go by, and oh, there he goes.
Yep, that's the way it is. Broadband is a huge thing. He is talking a lot about that right now, and it's part of Cooper's message too. I think they're announcing like $82 million in broadband for North Carolina. That's important. I mean, we saw during all these government-imposed shutdowns that folks couldn't log on, they couldn't finish classes, couldn't run their businesses. So this broadband, you think that's going to be the magic ticket to get some North Carolina votes here?
I think he's wanting it to be. I think because it is sort of a bipartisan thing. A lot of the demand for it is coming from more red areas out in more rural areas.
Sure.
So it's kind of an issue that, a lot of times Republicans are more free market and maybe don't accentuate that kind of, government spending on infrastructure and that kind of thing. But I do think it's something that, Democrats can talk about that might appeal to a swing state that, people in the rural areas would like to see better access, like, especially in these years where people were at home and for school and working from home and all this. It's become a really important thing, almost seen as a utility, a necessity for a lot of people.
Sure. Well, this is 2 weeks after the Iowa caucus.
Yeah. And
Trump's won 2, right, in a row here in North Carolina.
And to me, one of the most interesting things is we're here in the middle of January. You've got President Biden in town, as David Bass mentioned. I have to indicate which David indicated. Kamala Harris was just here. North Carolina is still seen by the Democrats as being in play. How much longer will that last? If they think it's in play throughout the year, we'll see a lot of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the other people standing in for them from the cabinet or other major political players. But if we see less and less of them as the year goes on, that will probably suggest that it's another good opportunity for Republicans.
Well, it's kind of a weird year in that Joe Biden is a 33% approval rating, so he can't really run, just sit back, even though Trump is not very popular either. You've seen a lot of polls showing neither of them are really poised to walk away with it, so it's kind of who's the least unpopular, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. There's third-party people running. It might just turn out to be kind of an odd year for that, but North Carolina is one of those states that it's a little right of center, but it's still seen in striking distance for Democrats. They've seen it that way, but it's always kind of slipped through their fingers a few times.
Sure.
But with the governor's race, maybe Stein, some of the Democrats might see him as having a really good shot. They might think maybe Biden could ride it on the coattails, that kind of thing.
Sure. I mean, I think part of the reason why they think it's so in play, I think they're lumping it in with like Florida, for example, is the relationship that Cooper has cultivated nationally with national Democrats. He's chair of the Democrat Governors Association. He's got a relationship with Biden, assuming that he calls him Roy and not Ray. But and I think without Cooper at the wheel, will North Carolina still seem like a really good target for Democrats later? Because down the road, while we talk about maps and all these other things, the statewide races are really trending more Republican in North Carolina. I don't know how much it's in play for Democrats nationally, but they're certainly going to put their money in. They've got $1 million ad buy going right now.
Yeah, 2024 is going to be a very interesting election. And of course, we don't know until November how it's going to shape out. But at least at this point in the game, Democrats appear to think that North Carolina is within striking distance.
Sure.
There's a couple states like Georgia and Arizona, some states that were seen as red but are sort of growing and more cosmopolitan. A lot of people are moving to the cities from more blue areas. I think Democrats have a vision of those kind of states trending their direction over time. And I think you do see more growth in North Carolina's cities when people are moving here than in the rural areas. So maybe they see it also as kind of, they're hoping it turns into a Georgia-Arizona situation.
Could be. Now, actually, speaking of the election, you've got some updates. Tell us what happened this week. It has been like one legal opinion or lawsuit after another this week.
There are lots of lawsuits, and just as a reminder, we have several lawsuits that are challenging changes in North Carolina election laws, including dealing with some of the rules of same-day voter registration and also with the 3-day grace period on mail-in absentee ballots and what poll observers do. So there are a series of lawsuits that are challenging that. We've seen some motions this week from the state legislative leaders who are backing their own laws, saying that you should dismiss these lawsuits. There's nothing to them. We've also seen some developments in redistricting. There are 3 different, for now, lawsuits challenging North Carolina's election maps. 2 of them are basically on hold because the people who filed them said, all right, well, we're into an election cycle now. Let's not even try to affect the 2024 races. But the third one has had a lot of developments. This is one that's challenging 2 state Senate districts in northeastern North Carolina. And the lawyers who are pushing this case for 2 African-American plaintiffs who live in northeastern North Carolina, they have been trying since Thanksgiving week to get some sort of order blocking these maps. Federal judge James Dever has not gone along with their scheme to compress the timeline. He wouldn't do it around the Thanksgiving weekend. He wouldn't do it around the Christmas weekend. He ended up holding a hearing which angered the plaintiffs who went to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, saying holding a hearing was the same thing as denying their request. The Fourth Circuit said no and dismissed their appeal. Then Judge Dever held his hearing, and the latest development this week was that the plaintiffs who are still itching for him to have some sort of ruling, the case got back to Judge Dever's courtroom this week, and instead of issuing a ruling, he gave Republican legislators another 5 days to respond to the latest court filing from the plaintiffs. So this case, if there's going to be any action, it's going to be so close to the start of the mailing of absentee ballots, the start of early voting, that it would be very hard to picture a court saying, yes, we're going to now go and give an injunction and throw the entire election into chaos. My guess is all of this redistricting stuff is going to have to wait until after the 2024 cycle.
Sure, and that portal to get absentee ballots, that's already open. People can start requesting them now. We have the longest absentee ballot period in the country, I think.
It's going to be really interesting this year to see because, in 2020, obviously we had a very, I would say, flexible election with COVID. So a lot of flexible rules around that. There have been a lot of legislatures across the country, though, in Republican states, including here in North Carolina, that have tightened up some of those restrictions. So it's going to be interesting to see how 2024 goes, especially if it's a repeat of Trump and Biden again.
Yeah.
To see the differences there with how the election actually goes with more, maybe more in-person voting, less of that flexibility.
Sure.
But the GOP leaders seem to want to convince the base, the voting the GOP voters to try to use those absentee, those early voting and absentee.
Yeah, they're running a bank your vote. Yeah,
because I think because some of the questions around the 2020 election surrounded that kind of voting, a lot of Republicans think, and in principle, it's best if everybody just vote on election day. So that's something they might have to overcome because they're, as you said, they have like a campaign trying to convince people. They call it bank your vote because they're thinking if we can say, okay, these votes are already banked, they can then spend resources on other people. Otherwise, they still have to keep everybody in mind rather than. So that's their idea on resources.
That is a really interesting ideology. Conservatives seem hesitant to take advantage of early voting or absentee voting. Do you think it's because they don't trust the system, or it's because they've always done it that way? They like showing up, getting the sticker, and
conservatives tend to be traditionalists.
Sure.
So the tradition for years and years was there's one day you go and you vote.
I still do that. I take my kids and we go get the sticker.
Exactly. That's what I tend to do as well. I have done early voting. I have done mail-in absentee once. In fact, thanks to a campaign from our good friend Dallas Woodhouse, one year he was really into that, and since you couldn't avoid him, you had to take one of his things, and okay, we'll fill it out. But usually I go on the actual election day. A couple other interesting lawsuit things just to point out without getting deep into the details, because we talked about them before in the debrief. There was a lawsuit that State Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls had filed against the Judicial Standards Commission, trying to block an election, an investigation into comments she made. This week she dropped that suit. As it turns out, the Judicial Standards Commission did the investigation, dismissed the complaint, and so if she hadn't filed the federal lawsuit, none of us would have ever even known that she was under investigation.
Right.
So that was an interesting development. And then this is an interesting thing that's brewing between Governor Roy Cooper and the legislative leaders. They have two active lawsuits right now. One is about changes to the state elections board, changing it from a 3-2 Democratic board, because Cooper's a Democrat, to a 4-4 board between Republicans and Democrats, an even split. That one is on hold as the case moves forward. The other one is about changes to appointments to state boards and commissions. Governor Cooper doesn't like the fact that Republican legislative leaders want to take away his appointments to various boards and commissions. And now, the latest development just today was that Chief Justice Paul Newby of the state Supreme Court has gotten into the act because Cooper went around an order from 3-judge panel and got a sympathetic Wake County judge to give him a temporary restraining order. And so Chief Justice Newby came into the case and he said, all right, I'm giving this back to this judge. And then the judge that he gave the case to said, we're not holding a hearing that was scheduled. We're going to hold it in a week. And so this is going to be a mess. It shows that just as with everything else, everything is political, and all of the fights are between Cooper and the Republican legislative leaders, and now sometimes the courts.
Right. It is crazy. I don't know how you're keeping up with all this, but the big one I think that a lot of people are supporting is this idea of election day being, ballots are due at the end of election day. That really created a lot of crisis, I think, in the elections and a lot of mistrust, because it felt like votes were being counted up way after election day. And that's something that I think that a lot of, particularly on the Republican side, are in favor of, that being the deadline, that it means that you have to get your absentee ballot in well before election day if you want it to be counted.
And it's not just crazy North Carolina Republicans. That change brings North Carolina back in line with most of the states.
Oh, that's interesting.
We're not outliers. We're not, it's some crazy red scheme. This is just North Carolina would like to join the rest of the country.
Right. Very interesting.
I remember watching, in 2020, right in the weeks following it, watching like Pennsylvania, and then, Arizona, and just seeing the week after week after week. And I think it feeds the perception
of they're
looking for votes, that sort of thing. So if you can have it be more condensed, if you can have the voting, the counting happen quicker, definitely a benefit there for election integrity.
Yeah, transparency, of course. Yeah. All right, good. What have you been watching this week?
We touched on this before the new year. We're kind of doing a look back at 2023 and some themes, and it was interesting to me that Israel-Palestine war had been such a major story, and so this week it was interesting to me to see they still kind of in North Carolina.
Oh, huge.
You don't think North Carolina politics is about global affairs, but it's So we had the families of Israeli hostages that are still being held by Hamas 104 days after. They visited both Cooper, hosted them at Governor's Mansion, and then they also had an event with Speaker Moore at the legislature. So they were just, they're, I guess, traveling around the country and to different countries, just petitioning people.
Sure.
Ask Hamas to give these hostages.
They had some really dramatic stories.
Yes.
It was hard to read.
Yeah.
We actually have a story up on CarolinaJournal.com if you want to take a look. We have some of the stories that these families shared. It's really dramatic to read.
And it's that conflict is also being seen around the city councils in the big cities. Raleigh City Council, I think it went like 3 hours of public comment. They're just packing people into these, Charlotte, Greensboro, whatever, and to make public comment calling for a ceasefire resolution, because I think the activists who want kind of Palestine liberation, they don't think they're going to get something like that through in the Congress, so they're focusing on if they can get a bunch of cities around the country to declare these ceasefire resolutions, they can present
Groundswell.
That. Americans are calling for this, half the major cities have done it, whatever. And then also another was Bill Graham, who's running for governor on the Republican side, called out. He said he supports Israel, but Mark Robinson has been anti-Semitic, and it's something I believe some on the left have also, Mark Robinson took a trip to Israel.
Right.
And some on the Democrat side were like, well, that doesn't make up for comments he made, maybe questioning the Holocaust, some people say, or things like, he's had some social media posts. So yeah, I think, taking a look at that, just saying.
Do you think it's getting traction? You think this will be an issue in November of 2024?
I don't know. Maybe in the congressional races, I would think, because Speaker Moore, obviously, he's a Speaker of the North Carolina House, but he's also running for Congress. So part of that might be trying to have some bona fides, I guess, in public policy to be able to speak to those kind of issues. It is interesting that even at a local level, it might be an issue, because in some of these cities, the city councilmen who refuse to listen, they're like, we're going to vote you out. So it could actually be an issue.
It could. Is this a litmus test, do you think, the position on Israel and Hamas?
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. It could be certainly among the people who are very actively interested in this topic. To me, my first reaction when I see the news that 200 people are packing the Raleigh City Hall to talk about this is, why aren't they talking about potholes, or crime,
or taxes, property taxes,
local issues,
or parks and rec, or the things that city councils do? I mean, nothing that Marianne Baldwin, who wasn't at that meeting, I think she had a good excuse, she was gone, but everyone else who's sitting there, they're not going to do anything that affects Israel or Hamas. Why don't you get them to do something they can actually do? Like, fixing, as I said, making sure the roads are good, making sure the cops are where they need to be, so we don't have all this crime. Remember, crime in Raleigh has been an issue in recent years.
Oh, absolutely.
All the time they're spending talking about this means they're not spending it talking about things a city can actually do.
Right.
I mean, it's just kind of an extension of the problem that, people talk about local media has kind of died.
Yeah.
I think even just attention to local, you ask somebody who the mayor of their town is or who their North Carolina House member is, they have no idea, but they might know the general of some of an Israeli operation. And, they're very focused on kind of the big picture, because that's what's on the main TV channels and the main Twitter accounts and things like that. So yeah, I do think what's the Raleigh City Council? I think it's the same thing that happened with blocking the road, where you're taking a local action. Israel's not going to care if you block highway, the Durham Freeway. They're not going to even probably see that. But
very interesting.
But you did.
Yeah, you did. You definitely did.
Maybe that's why I'm so interested in this.
I think that is what it is.
They did get my
Still
attention.
mad.
Yeah, because for people who don't know, I was just driving back to Orange County from Wake County and had a good 2-hour commute because of that road blockage, where they're just standing in the middle of the highway.
Sure. All right, we'll be following it. Thanks so much for tuning into the Debrief. Join us back here every week. Subscribe. We'll come right to your inbox, and make sure you hit up CarolinaJournal.com to watch everything that we've been working on and what we've been writing, covering, opinion columns and news. Thanks for sticking around.